Hallo Leute, ich habe wie jeden Montag eine neue Podcast-Folge für euch, aber eine besonders spannende, denn ich interviewe einen ehemaligen, extrem smarten Cambridge-Kommiliton von mir. Er hat nach dem Studium einige Jahre für die berüchtigte Palantir-Firma, will heißen für diverse Regierungen und Geheimdienste gearbeitet und ist inzwischen CTO eines künstliche Intelligenz-Startups. Sein einziges Makel: er spricht kein Wort Deutsch. Deswegen ist das heutige Video ausnahmsweise in englischer Sprache, aber unter dem Video in den YouTube-Einstellungen könnt ihr Untertitel aktivieren. Ich habe extra englische Untertitel anfertigen lassen, die sind menschlich angefertigt, sollten also so 99% korrekt sein. Ihr könnt, glaube ich, auch deutsche Untertitel einstellen, das wären dann aber Google Translate Untertitel. Müsst ihr also mal gucken, ob die hilfreich oder eher störend sind. Es ist die erste Vor-Ort-Podcast-Folge, also auch für mich ein ganz neues Erlebnis. Die Kamera hat ein bisschen gesponnen leider und sich dann auch frühzeitig verabschiedet, aber ich wollte das Video nicht abschneiden, weil wir gerade am Ende noch über Cambridge und Schach und ein paar spannende Themen gesprochen haben, die bestimmt einige von euch interessieren werden. Die genauen Themen und Kapitel findet ihr wie immer unter dem Video in der YouTube-Timeline und damit viel Spaß mit dem heutigen Video. All right, so guys, this is a very, very special episode today because first, it's the first time we're doing an episode live in presence, not on the internet. Second, it's the first episode with someone I know, not from the internet, but from the real world. And it's the first episode in English. So there will be subtitles for the German audience. I'm hoping to find some service or some person to actually transcribe it and translate it. But let's see. This is Sarah. I will have introduced you to this audience already as a very, very smart guy. Certainly one of the brightest people I've ever had the pleasure to do homework with. So very welcome to my show.
My honor. Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to talk about so many things today. We're going to talk about Cambridge. Obviously, we're going to talk about good old times. We're going to talk about chess and all the interesting things. We're going to talk about you being a CTO of a very interesting startup. But there's this one big name on your CV that everyone's going to be really, really interested to hear about. So Palantir.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people recently know them from the IPO and talking about stocks and stuff, but what do they actually do? I know it's like all very secret and like big analysis for big company, big tech, but also secret services, governments. How would you describe what Palantir actually does?
Sure. So yeah, lots of secrecy involved, although they are, with the IPO, doing a lot more publicity around what they really do. The short summary is kind of big companies, governments, they all have a common problem of so much data spread around everywhere, but how do you actually utilize it and get some value from it? So Palantir, they come in to help provide a software that can pull in that data from all these different sources and help users get some actual value out of it. So that could be a government side. You have things like police departments, the data on crime and activity, just as much it can be commercial, big data around an automotive company, or the designs that they have, or the cars that they have out on the streets, the results of those, any failures. Yeah, any industry you can name, there's data. It's obviously the big topic at the moment in the last few years. And Palantir's first goal is to help you put them into one place, organize it well, be able to take advantage of it, while still keeping up with permissions, privacy, make sure you're not misusing that data by any means.
So, and you were a software engineer for
Correct.
Multiple years, I think.
Just about over 2 years.
Just over 2 years. And I believe, if I remember correctly, you were a forward deployed software engineer?
That's right, yes.
So a forward deployed software engineer, that's like I think, if I remember, it's a bit like a software engineer required to also have social skills, something rather rare. So can you explain a bit, what's the difference and why did you choose that?
Sure. So maybe on the edge social skills wise, but the main difference is that you're client facing. So Palantir is a product company, it's a software company. Right. They're providing the same software for all their clients. But at the same time, you've got people working on the core of the platform that everyone gets, but you still want software engineers out with the clients who can do small tweaks for them, make sure the client can actually take advantage of the platform in the way that they need to.
So would you actually kind of wear suits and go into the client office, and that'll be mainly your role, but then you also do some engineering? Is it like kind of 50-50, or how does it work?
Yeah, so no suits, definitely no suits.
Right.
Even though often these places are a little bit more suited up. So you always stand out a bit if you go there and we're just all in t-shirts.
Right. So you work for like a very traditional company, say, you do like a contract with them, and you come in as a kind of the IT nerds.
Exactly.
Doing some data and software no one really understands.
Exactly. You just embrace that image after a while. But you come in, and like you say, there can be a spectrum for different clients, but it will be some mix of the client interaction, speaking to them, understanding their needs, and then the classic software engineering, actually going and coding it and making sure it works the way they want, and then going back to the client, testing it, see if they're happy, see what else they need. Clients always want more after they see it. So you kind of go through this iteration.
Whereas a normal software engineer would kind of do just that, right? Working on software. What percentage would you say do you spend actually doing software engineering and talking to clients, planning meetings?
It's hard to say, because I think one part of Palantir is that they let people choose that percentage. So you get people who are very want to do the social aspect and talking, and they might even spend 50, 60, 70% just doing the talking. And then there's people who just want to see the client data, but they don't really want to do the talking, and they're doing more like 10, 20% with the client. And then there's other people on the team that are doing more of the client interaction. So it really depends. There's really not one answer. And I think part of Palantir's like way of working is that roles are very fluid, and every role is a spectrum. You can never say this is the percentage between one and another. If you're a smart person and you can do the job, they let you kind of do it the way you want to. As long as the client's happy, you do it how you want to.
Makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of the modern approach. And yeah, that's kind of what you expect from a Silicon Valley tech company.
Exactly.
Although it's not a very typical Silicon Valley tech company. We're going to talk about that as well. But definitely that kind of culture seems like that makes a lot of sense, and it's similar at my job at Facebook, of course. But so as a forward deployed software engineer, you go to the client, and I remember you were traveling actually, into other countries.
Yeah, so a few travels, got to go to places like Australia.
Not too bad.
Not bad at all. The biggest one was Denmark. I was there for about a year, and then a few smaller countries on and off.
So you spent a year in Denmark, basically living in Denmark.
Yeah,
and
Palantir,
just working in Denmark for Palantir.
Yes, Palantir provided an apartment for the year, and live in lovely apartments. You chill. When you want to come home, they pay for the flights to go home. So you go for the weekend, come back on Monday, and yeah, you work there and then come back for a weekend at home.
Well, I mean, it's a bit like a consulting lifestyle, maybe consultants. Although it seems like you do very long projects. I feel that sometimes, I'm not a consulting expert, but sometimes they do shorter projects, and this 1 year in Denmark sounds quite like a
thing. That was a multi-year project. I only stayed there for a year, but there's people on the team and going on and off. So yeah, I think unlike the consulting, it really is long-term projects. They obviously get year, 2 year, 5 year long licenses with these clients. So different to a consulting, but obviously, you've got that travel aspect of a consulting. I think the main difference is even though they're multi-years, not many people stay on the one client for multiple years. They will move around, go to different clients. But again, it depends on your interests. There will be people who are actually Danish who live in Denmark, and they just stay on Danish clients because if they want to. Other people want to travel around more, go to different places.
You don't speak Danish, or did you learn
I didn't. I learned a little bit, enough to get through food in a restaurant. But honestly, even then, they're such lovely people, and they had English for signs, even for menus, to be honest. They had English. They were just nice people, so they always accommodated.
Amazing. And what type of clients did you work with? I'm sure there's only so much you can say, but what type of clients were? Because there are the kind of big companies, private clients, but then what people really care about when they hear Palantir is like secret services, governments, police. Did you do any of that?
Mine was mostly on the government space. So
really?
Most I can't speak about.
So you're essentially a spy. You were essentially a spy.
Sadly, it's not as glamorous as you might think from a movie and things. Definitely got to see some insights into governments as a whole and how they work. Spy might be pushing it a little, but I think, like, again, the Danish one, there's public record of kind of their work with the police. So as far as I can talk about it, like, they work with the police department, work on crime. Just to be involved in that kind of thing is amazing, and just to see kind of the impact that the software can have on a police department's efficiency. Yeah, you don't get to see that often.
It does sound extremely interesting and exciting. Now, of course, it can also be a double-edged sword. I mean, I think especially in the German media and the German social media, but I'm sure everywhere, it's when you talk about working for the government, working for the police, working for Palantir does a lot of work for NSA, CIA, FBI, all these big secret services. So not everyone likes the police, not everyone likes the government, not everyone would be, as I'd say, comfortable working for a secret service. How did you feel about that? Was it something that you really wanted to do, or were you a bit kind of, did you think like you were a bit wary of this being maybe, I don't know, you don't know in advance what exactly you're going to get, right? Like what you're going to work on. Sure, it's like always like we are the good people, but you never know.
Sure, there's unknowns there, and obviously, particularly in the US, you've seen all of the things there around privacy misuse in these government organizations. I think firstly is like I was super excited. A big part is how often do you get to see that kind of inside part of it.
Sure.
So that was definitely a big part of my interest. I think the second one was that, again, I'm not a Palantir anymore, I'm not selling them, but genuinely a big part of what they're doing is helping you get privacy first and making sure people don't access data that they're not supposed to access. When they access it, they're accessing it for a particular reason. You've got auditing around who's done what, when, and the trail of like how you got to do something and how you use the software. And so again, particularly US, you see a lot of the controversy around like people misusing data, using it for immigration and other things, or like other spying on people.
I wasn't even just thinking about data. Like I was more about like what they do. I also like generally would say that most of the things the government does or wants to do are like good things that I can probably support. But I mean, still like Palantir technology probably has helped kill terrorists. I'm going like just
supposedly.
It's likely that it helped kill terrorists. It's likely that it. I don't know. There was a lot of controversy when coming to this ICE. In the US,
yes.
The immigrations and customs,
yes,
something
enforcement, yes.
Right? So that they would like, on the one hand, there are like laws and rules, but not everyone likes the idea of the government expelling people from the country. Not everyone likes the idea of military or killing people. So is this something that you worried about, or do you know if it would have been affected by your work, any of that kind of?
Yeah, it does affect some people. And obviously there's plenty of people who join Palantir and say, I don't want to touch government. It's not my tech cake. And that's totally fine. You go on something else. I can't say why. I just personally wasn't that, I don't say not bothered by it, but like you say, there's a lot of good in what these organizations do. Second is like actually getting to see it for yourself. You can make an honest judgment of is it bad or not, or is it just media kind of misrelaying what they're doing or spinning it. Obviously, media don't know a lot of what happens inside, so they have to like spin it, and obviously it sells as well.
Tell me about it. I mean, Facebook's image in the media and in the public and what's happening inside the company are there's some overlap, but of course of two very different things.
Very different worlds. So seeing it for myself, I think was a big part of my interest. And third, I think it's important to differentiate the like software aspect from the like policies. Like democracy exists in society for a reason, to work on those things. And you shouldn't like, it's not up to a software provider to work on like deciding what organizations should and shouldn't do. So I kind of isolate those two things out, and like say, if you disagree with immigration policies and other things, those are things that should be lobbied against and worked on in politics. But that's very separate to the software. From the software's perspective, it's you're focusing on like, can we provide these organizations with the tools to be able to do things the right way? And whether they do things the right way is then the question for the politics aspect of things.
Yes, I guess still like choosing to work for them, you're kind of saying like, I think that what the US government kind of does in terms of global policies is net positive. Like I like there are some people that would be like, no, I'm so anti all of that, then I wouldn't do it. Which I wouldn't personally. Like I'm with you there. I think like it's important to hunt down terrorists, for example, even though it can be uncomfortable to think that I'm working on like human beings being hunted down, right? In general. Like, so it's I just wanted to ask you to get your like your perception, because this is always something that comes up, and there's these like, if you Google Palantir, like literally things like, is like one of the first questions is is Palantir evil? I think a lot of this because of the whole immigration area, but also some like, of course, privacy and surveillance and all of these.
Yeah, I think I'm net positive to democracy. If I believe in democracy, then I believe in like, should provide the right software. And
I like that approach. So you're saying you believe that what the political system is stable enough to do good overall.
Exactly.
So we should provide it with the best possible tools that we can. And that's exactly what Palantir does.
If that changes one day, then sure, that might change my opinion on working on these things. But as long as I believe in that system, then I have to believe that like you should provide the tools.
Right. And of course, that also kind of limits the governments you may want or not want to work with.
Sure.
And I know that Palantir is quite a patriotic company, at least from leadership perspective. Whenever I hear like Alex Karp speak, he does stress that Palantir is very US patriotic and kind of American values and American politics is what they want to support and spread in the world, which of course to a large extent is freedom of speech and democracy and all of these amazing values. But then again, there are, of course, will be skeptics say like, do we really want to help the US kind of try to become, or rather remain, such a global controlling power?
Sure. I mean, part of it is obviously I'm based in the UK. UK, US, like obviously they're allies and they work together at the same time. Like no one non-US citizen could ever see any of the US government work that's done. So you're still not going to get any of that overlap. And similarly,
so you have to be a US citizen to be kind of involved in the projects for the FBI, say?
Yeah, you would have to be, or any US government work, they will have their own kind of policies around anything they do there. So you're still like, just because you work at Palantir doesn't mean like you're working on those projects, or even that you can work on some of them. So there is that divide there. Obviously, there might be something you work on that ends up indirectly going to one of those clients. Right. But again, obviously, US government, any governments have policies and things that and checks that you go through before you can work on that. And again, depends on sensitivity of data and things, who's allowed to see what data.
So now, since you excitingly worked mostly for government types projects, was there anything, without naming a specific place or project or government, was there anything that surprised you, anything that stood out to you? Like, obviously it's a very unique experience working for these type of organizations. Was there anything that was different than you would have imagined as a citizen, maybe?
I have to think about it.
Whether more or less competent than you would have thought?
I think more competent.
Really?
Actually, maybe I've seen both, but they have more potential and more competence than you might guess. I guess on the flip side, they're not always utilizing it, and that's partly where Palantir come in, is help them utilize what they could do. Yeah, and it's a tough question to answer.
I know it's these kind of like questions are super hard to answer on the spot. But also, like, how involved were you kind of in closing the case and like end to end on the project? Like, say you deliver your software, you help them use it, then do you actually get to experience like what they do with it? Are you actually like, oh, we caught this criminal thanks to your work, and are you still part of that, or is that kind of a black box?
Depends on the client, depends how they're working. Main things it depends are kind of how closely you're working with that project, and providing a very specific feature for them to do whatever they're doing. And partly is also sensitivity of data. So sometimes we're providing the software, but we never get to see the data that goes on it. And sometimes, like you say, you can dive into the data yourself and play with it. So yeah, it depends how hands-on you're, one, able to be, and two, whether you have to be or not. Often where possible, like a client will share, like, we were able to do this thanks to your software, and that helps us or Palantir people understand kind of how the software is being used and help learn from that and help them even more. But yeah, it's not like you're becoming a police person while you're on the job. But sometimes you get to see some kind of visibility of what they've done with it and how they've done it.
Did you have to, like, were there any like extraordinary security protocols, background checks? Did you feel like there was like this was a big thing, like some additional barriers to joining Palantir or the projects that you normally, I mean, you always have background checks even when joining Facebook, for example, but was it more?
For Palantir, joining the company itself, no. Like I said, you can don't have to work on government projects. You can work on commercial and other things. So joining the company is the same as any other company. Working on the projects depends on the project completely. Like I said.
So for some projects, you might get vetted just for working on that project, even though you're already an employee.
Exactly, yeah. But that's part of the client side rather than from Palantir's side.
Interesting. Your name must be all over the files of so many governments.
Not quite. Like I said, I mean, no comment on any of that. But again, it depends what you're working on, how much you see. Like I said, sometimes you can help on a project but never see the data, so you don't have to go through that same vetting. And the people who do want to go through that vetting because they are able to see the data might do so.
Sorry, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot and may ask you all these uncomfortable questions. But to continue that theme, are you? However comfortable you are, but I should have asked you before. But are you comfortable talking about salary and earnings and these topics?
Yeah,
because there are a lot of young people obviously watching this and also interested just in the career part.
Sure.
You talked a bit about the work environment.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about kind of, because I talk about it from a Facebook perspective a lot, like benefits and compensation and all of that. Yeah. So you joined straight after a bachelor's degree.
Correct.
In London, Palantir, forward deployed software engineer. What's the type of compensation that you would get, and did you negotiate it? Were there any benefits?
So firstly, I'll come to benefits last. So for salaries, grad salary, I think at the time you could get anywhere between kind of 60 to 80k starting salary plus options. Again, that may have changed since the IPO. I'm not totally sure how that works, but at that time you could choose your package as well, and they gave you 3 options.
Right.
So you could choose more options and lower salary or higher salary and less options. So you had that aspect that does it. Like I said, it was 60 to 80k when I joined. I think that might have gone up since. I'm not sure since then, like whether it's gone back down or anything's changed on that front.
How's the progression? You were there for 2 years, but
yes,
I'm assuming it did increase.
Yeah, so you had 2 things. Firstly, everyone who stays 18 months used to get a 20% bonus or 20% raise, sorry.
Right.
So, which is obviously significant.
Yes.
And then after that, there was I think it was a kind of default every 12 months after that was 5% raise. As like
so it's not performance based.
So that's like as a minimum. Then after that, then obviously you've got the performance aspects, or if you change role and other things, that might change it more. But that was kind of like a default base that you're kind of almost guaranteed. Like if you're not hitting the mark, you're probably not going to get fired or not stay. Right. But if you've lasted 18 months, you're obviously doing well, and you kind of got that as a default. So yeah, so those were the main salaries. Like I said, that is changing or may have changed since I've been there because of the IPO. I'm not sure if they still give options. I know they had other types of stock compensation. So
did you, I mean, you were at Palantir for 2 years. You got stock options.
Correct.
They IPO'd. That sounds like the dream for you.
I mean, it was a nice extra money. Like I didn't expect, when I joined, the price or the value of the options or the strike price the 5 years before I joined compared to when I joined, it went 5x. So I kind of caught it at this peak, and then it stayed there for a while. So I thought it was like, it's not really worth anything. I just missed the like big rise. And then obviously IPO happened, and then somehow it just rocketed.
What kind of multiplier are we talking about from these options to
when it started, it was around like $7.50, which was basically my strike price roughly. And so, yeah, I mean, you see it now, it's at some $24 at the moment. I know it hit the lofty heights of $39 while it was still in, but there was lockup on the options, so you couldn't trigger them all yet. But yeah, it's a significant multiplier for something that, at least when I left, I thought like, it's not going to be worth anything. So,
and are you holding it?
No, I've sold mine. I think it has long-term value. There's a separate bit of the options after you leave. You have 3 years to trigger them, or they expire. So I had to trigger mine, otherwise they would have expired soon.
Right.
So that's why I triggered them. I think Palantir have huge long-term value, and if you want to invest, and I think they're a good one if you're ready to click it and hold for a few years.
Do you do a lot of like investing and stocks and all of that yourself? Crypto?
No, I'm not. I leave it to any funds for ISAs and things like that. But I haven't done any investing. Crypto is a bit too up and down, high variance for me. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I'm just curious because you're, I mean, a smart tech person. So some of them decide to spend a lot of time analyzing these markets, and some of them don't. I'm also not really into finance and crypto as much as many of my followers sometimes would have hoped. I get asked a lot about my opinions on stocks and different currencies, but I don't have that much. But it does sound very, very lucrative and nice.
It can be, for sure. It can be downside
when
just
your
as big.
company IPOs after you joined it.
IPO definitely is a big one.
Yeah. Very, very nice. And speaking of IPO, we also need to talk about your startup. We will, because you left Palantir to join a startup. But did you get a chance to interact with Alex Karp? I'm just curious.
Not directly. I think the closest was he used to run Tai Chi classes.
Right.
So he's a big Tai Chi fan. So particularly in the California office, he would do a class in one of the main buildings, and just an open floor, and anyone can join.
So you did Tai Chi classes with Alex Karp?
I think I did it once with one of those classes, just to see him and see what it's like. I know I've seen him even in the London office. Sometimes you come and he obviously has a big glass room, which is often empty, but when he comes, he uses it. And then I remember randomly turning once, and he's there in kind of his like sports gear, and he's just doing Tai Chi in the room.
Right.
Unexpected sights to like just turn around and see that there. But yeah, he's a character.
He's a very interesting person. He does a lot of like interviews, and of course now also with the IPO, there's a lot of interest in what he says, and he sometimes complains that he's like very restricted now in what he can say, and like without manipulating the market and all of these. But yeah, he's also very critical of Silicon Valley. And I said before, it doesn't really seem like a very typical Silicon Valley company, for example, in that it does like work for military and secret services, whereas Silicon Valley and big tech in general are quite left-leaning. They are, and they're not that close to governments, I feel, in general. And Palantir seems like kind of definitely the outsider in this community of Facebook, Google, Amazon, Netflix. Is this something you talk about at work? Are you kind of like...
I think it depends. Maybe partly depends on your political interest. Sure. And again, also depends if you're working on like a politically sensitive kind of project, then you're probably going to talk about it more. Yeah, I think that kind of politics is probably limited to the people working directly on some of those US government projects. More likely, like I said, at the end of the day, the software company just building software tools. So a lot of the time, you're not thinking
Facebook is extremely political. I can tell you. Like it's like we have this internal Facebook, right? Which is called Workplace. I don't know if you know the product. Yeah. So this internal Workplace, which is like for those who don't, it's like a copy of Facebook essentially, and kind of an enhanced version of Facebook within completely separate database, obviously. And we use it for internal communication. So we don't write emails. We ping each other on chat, on Messenger, and we do groups and posts and likes and shares, all of that internally. And every time there's like something political happening in the world, there's like this huge debate internally. Okay. And it's quite interesting to see how it's like, it's obviously very, very left-leaning, but still there are a lot of controversies and there's a wide range of opinions within the company.
Right. I mean, Facebook's obviously a much bigger company. I remember like when I was at Palantir, I think it was about 2,000 people.
Only?
Yeah. So it's despite the like magnitude of how much they do, they have scalability very well nailed. Like I think they have a lot more they can do with it, but 2,000 people running everything. It might be bigger now. I don't know the numbers. But so yeah, you have a smaller, much smaller pool of people to have different political things. And like I said, I think it applied more to the US side, so I probably didn't get to see it as much as I can't say it hit too much on the European side.
And now one thing that we left out was kind of the whole benefits and maybe working hours and that some type of stuff. I remember being quite jealous when because we were doing the bachelor's degree, and then I stayed for the master's for part 3, and then you left to join Palantir with like your 80K or whatever salary and very nice working conditions.
Correct.
What was it like? Can you tell us a bit?
So we'll come firstly benefits. I think part of it's just like breakfast, lunch, dinner in the office. If you're traveling, then they're paying for hotels, apartments, all the food and expenses you spend, flights as well. Like they're doing everything. Their policy really is, and again, this may have changed since IPO, but at the time, at least, the policy was very much like, we just want you to do your best work. Like, you shouldn't be thinking about, oh, am I hungry? Or like, how much am I going to spend on this flight? Do I have to take a really early morning flight just to save some money? And you're going to be 10 times more tired. They're like, just take what you want as long as you deliver. And so, you got what you need to get stuff done. Food is sorted for you, everything you need. Again, I think it may have changed a little bit since the IPO, and obviously when you're reporting to shareholders how much you're spending and everything, that changes things. But at least at that time, it was very free.
But you say you have to deliver, so did you work a lot? Hours?
Mixed. I think the part of them hiring grads, a lot of grads out of university or quite young, is that a lot of them don't necessarily have like marriages, kids, family. So you do get a lot of people working late hours. It's not necessarily because it's forced upon them, but there was a little bit of a culture of kind of people cared about what they were doing and genuinely wanted to like just get things done. But that also spreads a little bit, right? If you've got like all the rest of your team are like working later, like you can't be that one person that doesn't. Like you kind of feel it, even if no one's saying it, you can feel it a little bit. Having said that, there are plenty of people do their hours, get things done, and don't have to work crazy hours. But it does take a little bit of kind of, I want to say like willpower, a bit of kind of, you know what you have to deliver. And if you're just like fight a little bit of the like, it's not even peer pressure, it's just a societal pressure of if everyone else is working late, do I have to as well? I think you have to fight it a little bit, I found. But it's totally fine that people can work their normal 9 to 5 kind of thing and get things done. But I'd say it's not the norm, and you get a lot of people working more like 10, 11 hours, 12 hours a day.
That's interesting. That's definitely a bit of a difference, I would say, to like a Facebook working hours. I mean, there are people working a lot, but I would say the majority don't work crazy hours. Like 35, 40 hours a week, I would say. Is quite realistic.
Again, it depends on different teams as well. I think I was obviously forward deployed, so I was more on the client side. From what I saw, it was more on the client-facing projects because client work naturally has like, need this deadline by yesterday kind of attitude. And so that one can force it a lot more.
That's one of the things, by the way, that I really like about my job, that I don't have clients. Like there's no one waiting for it, right? When we change stuff on Facebook, like when there's a new feature, or in my case, like integrity work being done, there's no one really waiting for it, except when it's privacy regulations.
Right.
That's definitely something where there can be a deadline, but generally the work is not really time sensitive.
Right.
Which is obviously different when you're like trying to catch someone with the police, or like, I don't know, mitigating some incident, or I don't know, I'm making things up.
Sure. I can't comment on any such cases, but yeah, the client work definitely has a little bit of that deadline-based work. Obviously, it ends up building really impressive things in really short spaces of time. And it's not like every client all the time is like this. You might have it, like you say, something about the client's rest of their world has changed that's causing it, or you're at the start of a contract and they're trying to get going, or like they're behind some schedule, that kind of thing. It can happen. It's certainly not all the time, all year round, but it is part of what can kind of burn people out, is that they're spending these long hours, and then at some point it takes its toll.
Interesting, but it does sound like a very interesting job, obviously, and well paid, and a good employer, but definitely a bit more, I don't know, maybe a bit more stress on the people, a bit more pressure.
It can be.
Maybe in some other tech companies, but then again, some startups also have very, very, very stressful or high pressure work environments. So
exactly, like I said, I didn't find it so bad. I think I had on and off times, and if I had a stressful couple of weeks, I would then take the next week's easier. And part of the Palantir flexibility is that like some days I'd come in at 10, 11, and I'd just rock up 12 even, and because I know I've been up the previous nights, kind of very late finishing work, and there's no clocking in, no one's like counting your hours. So if you're delivering, you do it in your hours, whatever works.
And is there a strong corporate identity, would you say? I mean, you came in here into my apartment with your Palantir hoodie, so you're still wearing their stash, obviously. But
yes.
Is there a lot of like culture of we Palantir offsite events? I don't know, team building.
Yeah, definitely. I think I mentioned like a lot of the reason people are working a lot is because they genuinely care about what Palantir are doing. They're interested in the clients. They've chosen to work on particular clients because they find those industries interesting. And I think Palantir is full of extremely smart people. And so I think that also builds a sense of camaraderie, that you're kind of like, you're working with smart people, you're building really special things. And that builds that kind of team and identity, that kind of, we can do this together. I think that's taken the company quite far so far.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, that all sounds extremely interesting. One more thing I have to ask about Palantir before we close that chapter. Are you a Lord of the Rings fan?
I'm not. I've never watched Lord of the Rings, amazingly.
Wait, you have never seen it? Never?
No, I know it's ironic, but I never got around to it.
All right, that kind of, yeah, that completely ruins what I wanted to discuss.
Sorry.
But no, that's fine. That's so surprising. You're a computer scientist.
I know.
And you haven't seen Lord of the Rings.
I know.
Interesting. Because the name is pronounced differently in the films.
Is it?
Yeah. So it's like when there's like Gandalf, and they are these seeing stones, right, in the film. So that, but they say Palantir.
Interesting.
Not Palantir. Everyone says Palantir when talking about the company.
Yeah, I've heard that pronunciation.
Palantir in the films.
That's interesting. I've heard that pronunciation used, but it's not the dominant one.
Obviously, it's a fictitious language, and I don't think Tolkien has specified how this one's pronounced. That's what like my superficial research on the internet yielded. But yeah, I just thought that'd be curious, and I was counting on you as an IT nerd to help me out. But
I'm afraid I can't help there.
That's fine. Now, you had this job, which was very interesting, but then you left it for probably something that was at least initially paying a lot less, because you went on to become the CTO of a tech startup, which is called Monolith. It does artificial intelligence, which is another exciting buzzword. So what do you guys do?
Sure. So what we do is helping engineering companies, and engineering, I mean things like automotive, aerospace, packaging, kind of building physical products. And we help those industries design better products faster. So I'll take automotive as an example, because obviously everyone has a car. They can kind of imagine what that's like. Building a car, designing a new car. You have people who work on the design of the car. You have people working on just the body of the car, the wheels. There's people testing the crash test. Will it survive? How much damage will it take? Looking at, is this manufacturable? How much will it cost? What's the CO2 emissions? So many different departments doing different aspects. And so you can imagine they're all designing their parts, and then you need to test it somehow. And so then they build a prototype, they go test it, and then they see, oh, it wasn't as good as they hoped, because there's just so many things that are interacting. So like, okay, let's go back, try some different designs, build a prototype, test it. It's not as good as we hoped still, back and forth.
Right.
A car is incredibly expensive to build. The prototype costs a lot. So this iterations take months, years, costing hundreds of thousands of pounds. Yeah. And the question is, how can we help them do that faster, cheaper, and kind of get to a better design in less time and less money? And the key part here is they're generating so much data. These automotive companies have been doing work for 100 years. They've built, or how many years, they've built so many different cars. And they've generated data on that time. What designs worked, what didn't, what were the performance of these different designs. And so we're using AI to learn from those designs and those results to then give them predictions. So if they have a new design, before they spend time building the prototype and testing it, can we tell them in advance, wait, don't waste your money and time. There's going to be a problem here and here. You should try this design instead, because that'll fix those problems. And so,
sounds like a more specialized Palantir, right? Something like Palantir is a lot about like kind of getting information from all these various data sources, and now you're doing predictions about building things specifically. Yeah,
the AI beyond top is probably the biggest difference.
Right.
And so using that AI, but particularly obviously AI has been big in the last few years, and there's been so much research and work done on it. One area that we're particularly focused on is AI for engineering, because engineering, you have a few differences compared to other AI like computer vision and things. One difference is you often have less data. Depends on the type of problem, but maybe they've tested like 500 different cars. That's still not a lot. It's not millions of cars.
No.
So it's often lower volume data. Secondly, you have 3D geometries. So a lot of AI has looked at like image recognition. You have 2D. 3D is a whole different ball game. And so there's a lot less AI that's been done or research that's been done in those areas. So those are two particular areas where engineering differs. And so where a lot of our AI is focused on, it's not just how we can do AI in general, but in these particular types of problems.
Right. That makes sense. And how do you get to become the CTO of a random AI startup? Like how did that happen?
Sure, by accident mostly. When I didn't join as the CTO. I joined as software developer, kind of the first software developer. They'd done kind of a couple of prototypes in MATLAB and just like a quick React app.
Right.
But I joined as kind of the first software developer to make the platform. Kind of what they'd done a couple of kind of projects with customers, and they learned a lot from it. And they were like, okay, now how do we make something generic that we can use for all clients going forward? Mm-hmm. So I joined as that, and then over time kind of evolved, and then I was kind of helping more aspects than just the software, and then a bit out of chance just ended up becoming CTO.
Just like that? Like how? Like at some point there must be like a conversation like, do you want to become CTO? Like, yeah, sure, why not? Or like how did it happen?
Sure. Yeah, without too much politics, I eventually at some point like they're like, you're kind of doing a lot of the CTO kind of role, and then it kind of made sense for me to be the CTO.
And how did you find the startup? Because often CTO, like these chief positions, are founding members, and in this case, you just you were just hired into the startup. How did you choose that one?
Again, a lot of luck. So when I left, I gave my notice to Palantir and left. I didn't have anything lined up at that point.
Right.
Why? So I knew I needed a change. Again, Palantir is a fantastic company. Even when I left, I told them, maybe I'll come back one day. Like, I really like what they do. But I just needed to learn. I wanted to learn things like team management. I wanted to do a different type of technology. And I didn't want to leave the UK. So I didn't want to go to any of Palantir's other work because it was in the US or elsewhere. So I knew I had to leave, but I didn't know what to. I was also kind of okay with just taking a couple months out. So I gave him my notice. I just started looking at that point. So the accidental story was I was initially speaking to an education startup. I'm very interested in education. I like teaching. So I was speaking to them, and then they were in an accelerator called Founders Factory. And so I had spoken to the CEO who was kind of starting up at really early stage. I'm talking ideas on pen and paper kind of thing. So I'd spoken to her, and then I went to meet her in person. And the day I went, Founders Factory doing a kind of fair for all their startups. They run an incubator and an accelerator. So I went to that fair, and then I had to wait a few minutes because I was early. And so I just walk around the fair. There's all these startups. No interest in any of them. Like, not that they're doing uninteresting things. It's just not what I'm looking for. But I have to stall some time. So I just go loop around a couple of times.
Right.
And I see this company saying, we're making Jarvis from Iron Man. For those who haven't seen Iron Man, Jarvis is like the AI assistant to Tony Stark, who kind of suggests like, oh, you should try this design. This is what you should do. I'll go run the simulations and figure out. And then in the morning, he wakes up and the new kind of suit is there waiting for him. And so they're saying we're making Jarvis, and I just laugh. Like, honestly, I just laugh. Like, oh, it's this ambitious startup thinks they're making Jarvis kind of thing. But I've got a few minutes to stall, so I just go speak to them. Just kind of, honestly, it was as a joke, and they know this. Like, it was genuinely as a joke. I just spoke to them. I spoke to them. I was like, okay, I think the CEO was busy talking to someone else. I spoke to the COO at the time. She just kind of introduced me to a bit of what they're doing. It's like, okay, cool. Still was talking to education startup. And then later I was like, okay, fine, I'll speak to the CEO. I'll go meet him once. Again, still like, nah, probably not, but I'll speak to him. I was actually very skeptical of AI in general. I find a lot of their use cases, I find either like don't really make sense to me. So I think the example I always use is like bank trading, where obviously a lot of the automated trading now is using AI techniques. The thing I find hard to comprehend is that it's modeling human behavior. Like, the stock prices move based on human behavior. Obviously, part of it signals from things like news and reporting of finances of these companies, but a lot of it is human behavior, and the last 6 months in Reddit has proven that. So with that,
although that's the same goes for YouTube algorithm, for example, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's a very successful AI.
Yes,
based on human behavior.
Exactly. So they work. I don't deny that they don't work. It's just something doesn't quite click for me, that it feels like it's like modeling something truly mathematic. Like, obviously machine learning in particular.
Okay. So you prefer when there's a bit more of a specified space.
Like, machine learning in particular is like essentially creating an equation, like some really complicated nonlinear equation that predicts some output based on some input. That's what it's doing. And so when it's approximating something, and so when it's approximating human behavior, for me, if, I don't know, something doesn't quite click, where it's like, but human behavior isn't some formula that you can put to it. So this is why I just wasn't that interested in a lot of AI-based kind of work. And then the thing that Richard, the CEO, kind of got my attention with was he was basically like, we're modeling engineering. This is like real physics. It's just that the physics equations are so complicated that you can't write them all out and simulate them directly. It takes too long to compute. They're just like very complex partial differential equations. They don't have nice closed forms. You can't compute them directly. So then that's why he was like, machine learning here genuinely makes sense. We're just approximating those equations as closely as possible. That's what got my attention. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, now I'm interested. Like, now you're talking. So that was the big part that kind of got my attention. And then the second one was that there was no product yet, but he had clients. Like, at the time, we talked to people like Rolls-Royce, Airbus, L'Oreal, like big names. And it's just kind of dropped there with no product. And I was like, okay, if you've like, a big part of this early startup is actually getting people interested in what you're doing. And like, how many startups just die before they even start because no one actually cares about what you do?
So I like that. You came for Iron Man and you stayed for the partial differential equations.
Exactly.
Okay. Very, very, very nice story. And now, but how is, this was Monolith. It was the startup you're with now. How is it Jarvis, like when you're like this, you help a car company build cars? Like I'm not sure I get the Iron Man analogy.
Sure. So I guess the main thing is you want to guide an engineer as far as possible into getting to a perfect design, but you can never take the human out of the loop. For example, if you have BMW made cars for years, if you try and get an AI to generate a perfect car, I'm sure it can generate something, but does it look like a BMW? It just looks like a random generic car. Like, BMWs have a style. There's a reason you know a BMW. You look out on the street, you see a BMW, you know it just because there's a certain shape that they use. There's a style that they have. And
that's another Palantir parallel, because they stress a lot that what they do is not just kind of doing like AI or data analysis, but it's more of like providing humans with tools, right? So it's kind of this fusion, this kind of this hybrid solution where there's human intelligence and artificial intelligence or data intelligence, and together it can be extremely powerful.
Yeah, very similar to what we have here. Human AI together. How can we put the two? And so, and then the Jarvis link is, again, from the movie. You see like Tony says like, oh, we had a problem with the cooling system, figure out how to make it work at these altitudes. And then Jarvis goes away based on the data it's got and runs some simulations that are kind of figuring out, okay, at this altitude, what design changes can I make? And there's like exponential number of different design changes that can be done. But it does all the work of trying to figure out which design change is going to make sure there's not a cooling or free cooling issue. And so the same thing applies to automotive. You know it needs to pass a crash test in these scenarios. You know it needs to hit this performance, have this maximum CO2 emissions, but you don't know how to get there because every change you make changes everything about everything. So that's where, again, how can we AI tell you what's going to happen? And it's a mix of forward direction, which is like, if I make this tweak, what's going to happen? And then the reverse direction is, I want to hit this performance. What tweak do I need to make? And so it's like a constant back and forth that the engineer is doing of tweaking, getting suggestions, tweaking, getting suggestions till they're happy.
And how is it going? How is you didn't even have a product for a long time, but still getting a lot of interest from potential clients. Now, where's the startup? I think it's grown a lot, you told me.
It has. So when I joined, so that was October 2018, so 2.5 years ago. So at that time, I think Richard had spent a few months, maybe up to about a year, kind of talking to these clients, just getting information, understanding their problem really deeply. And so since I've joined, it's basically like the platform's gone through iterations of existing. And yeah, I think when I joined, I was maybe the 4th or 5th employee.
It's very early. Yeah.
So very early. I think now it's at 24-ish. And got some big growth hopefully coming up. Currently closing Series A at the moment, so fingers crossed that goes smoothly.
Series A meaning, and that's by the way a topic on its own. But
yes,
since we do have time, can you maybe explain a bit how that works? Because I'm sure many people are interested. Like, how do get these startups get from an idea to then getting maybe a round of funding and then there are like all these series A, Series B, IPO eventually. Like how does it work? Where's the money coming from?
Sure. So yeah, like startups can go through very different kind of styles of how they get money. A typical one, if you're following the like VC fundraise kind of route, is that you come up with an idea that you're kind of bootstrapping yourself and just trying to get interviewing potential clients, trying to gather lots of info, and then people often get what's called like a pre-seed fund. So they get funding of kind of 100K, 200K, that kind of range. I want to say small, but obviously that's also a lot of money at the same time. And that can be from angel investors. It can also be from things like accelerator programs and incubator programs.
Which, of course, yeah, I mean, it is small for a company, but
yes.
then if you put yourself in the shoes, like you have an idea,
yeah.
and then someone gives you 200 grand
yes.
for the idea, that is a lot.
It's a great, it's a lot of money. It's amazing how quickly you can use that all up, but it's some money to kind of get going. And so often people use that to then kind of get going a bit, test out some ideas. You hire a couple people to help build out a prototype, go do interviews. But you can see that actually, that's not actually, if you hire 4 people, then that money goes very quickly. You've got a few months to prove whether this is a real thing or not. And plenty of companies will die because either the idea is not good enough or they run out of money before they get to prove that it's a good idea. But yeah, hopefully you are able to prove that it's a good idea. You get some like potential interest from clients. You prove that actually there's a market for this. There's some value in what you're trying to build. And then you then go try and get funding to actually like make this a real thing. And so that's typically like a seed round. That can be anything between kind of £1 to £2 million. No prescriptive rule, but maybe even as low as £500,000, but kind of up to 2 million kind of range. And so again, that can be from angel investors, but usually at that point you're starting to get to VC funds, maybe not the multi-billion VC funds, but the slightly smaller ones. Will start investing, again, if they like your idea. So a lot of networking needed, a lot of pitching. You can go through hundreds of pitches and everyone's like, it looks interesting. Come again in a few months when you've got more traction, even though you don't have a few months, like you need that money. Can be a very draining experience. And I think just as well as a really good idea and proven market, you generally have to have good persuasion skills as well and presentation skills, and a good vision of where you want to go. But then, yeah, if you hit that seed fund, then you have bigger runway, so you can hire more people, start building it out. Hopefully, like as you get clients, you can start getting revenue, and that's funding your runway as well. And so that's why I say like it depends on the startups. Like some startups might want to be self-funding, like their revenue is funding the money that they're spending. The balance is basically trends move very quickly, and whilst you could make small organic growth and it takes 20 years to build it, but by that time trends have changed, someone's beaten you to it. And so that's why there are a lot of very big companies that remain not profitable for a very long time, right? I think that even like Tesla was not profitable, but making all these cars, and I'm surely financing a lot of that from revenue, but also getting a lot of investments when technically they couldn't afford it. Exactly, and you're basically making the bet that says like, I could do this really slowly, but it's a now or never kind of thing. Like I don't have time to spend 10 years trying to slowly build this up. So once I've proven this is an opportunity, you're basically, give me investment, I'll build this 10 times faster. The investors, obviously, if they're investing in you, they want you to build quickly. So they're giving you money so you can accelerate that growth and be the first to market, or the first one that kind of conquers that market. It becomes a bit of a rat race where you're constantly like, every time you grow, you're getting more funding, hiring more people, then you need to make revenue in order to cover those costs, and then you want to prove yourself well enough that you can then get a bigger round. So you typically go pre-seed, then seed round, then a Series A, then after that it's just Series
So those
B,
are just names for different funding rounds, or is there a categorical difference between these pre-seed, seed, and Series A, or is it just more money?
I mean, it's slightly arbitrary. Typically, like I said, pre-seed, you're looking at kind of 50 to 200K kind of range. And so that one is usually angels, small investors. And then seed round is the kind of 500,000 to 2 million, and then smaller VCs and or angels. And then Series A, you're looking at bigger VCs, probably series, again, arbitrary, but Series B, Series C onwards is when you're getting to the bigger VCs and more the like bankers, financiers kind of direction. And so in each phase, you're kind of also trying to prove different things. So at the early stage, you've got nothing, right? You're just trying to prove that actually the idea has potential and the market exists for it, and you're the right person to deliver for it. And as you go, then you start having to prove this is a good idea, and you're starting to get a good prototype, you're getting traction. Then the next Series A, you might be like, it's a mix of vision for the product, but there's more around the revenue. And by this point, you've had funding, you better be proving that clients are paying for this. So you have to start proving revenue. And then after Series B, C onwards, you're really proving this is like the money.
And where exactly are you? Are you selling your product to clients?
Yes, we are. So we have several big clients.
And for how long have you been selling it? Because I think for how long have you not had a product that you're selling?
So I joined October 18. So I started building the prototype. We used the first version with a client in January, February 2019. Obviously it's worlds apart from where we are now, but it was a genuine prototype, and a lot of aspects of that still exist in how it was built. So that was like a 3-month project. Again, I would say 2019 was a big learning phase for us, where we're doing more 3-month, 4-month projects and just taking in as much information as we could. 2020 onwards is where clients were giving us year-long licenses, and it was like a more long-term kind of revenue. But yeah, since 2019, it's been a product that people use.
And what does it mean for you personally? Like, it sounds very fancy and extremely nice to be a CTO of a growing startup. Like, you have various people reporting to you. So kind of in terms of hierarchy, you're in a sense much higher than you were at Palantir.
Sure.
How does the compensation compare? Is it already, would you say it's like worth it? It's very interesting, of course, but is it worth it financially, or are you still ramping up towards that?
It depends. Like, my compensation is more probably on the stock side than in salary. So it depends where you are in your life, whether that's a balance you want to make. I'm living at home. I have minimal expenses, so I don't really care about my salary at the moment. Although it is certainly a nice salary, don't get me wrong. It's not as good as Palantir, but I've got stocks that are plenty making up for it. When at some point I cash those in, then yeah, it might be worth it. Hopefully it's worth it based on the current growth. But you're kind of compensate, instead of getting compensation up front in like the regular salary, you're balancing that with more stocks that you can then hopefully cash out later.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, of course, like it's a bit more of a bet, but it seems like it's going in an amazing direction, and you are being part of that and leading it as a CTO. What's a typical day like? Every day is different. What's your week like? What are the actual roles of you as a CTO of that AI startup? Do you still do actual coding or AI or maths or?
Still code. It's probably one I'm trying to do less of than I do, and I have been able to. I think the startup environment is you're always under-resourced. There's always more things you want to do than you can afford to hire people to do. So for me, I think the main things I'm juggling typically is like the CTO, which is maybe more the strategy side, the alignment between different teams, that kind of aspect, the long-term thinking. Then obviously I'm getting involved in things like fundraising as well. But then also of leading the software team, also being the DevOps engineer sometimes. Thankfully, we are hiring for a lead software developer and a DevOps engineer to kind of cover those things. But until you can afford them, it's kind of me covering in between those gaps. And then, but yeah, so then part of my time is sometimes recruiting as well. Sometimes it's just making sure different teams are happy, make sure like customer success team and the product teams have what they need. They have a particularly tough role that they're in between both the technology side of the product and the maybe business side of marketing, sales. They're caught in the middle. It's a tough kind of vertical to be in. And so trying to make sure that they're getting what they need, they have the time to do what they need to get done. That's often part of my time as well. And then honestly, sometimes it's bug fixing because the client needs it urgently. And I still remember the code because I wrote the code 2 years ago. So I can go in very quickly, do the fix, deploy it. Try not to do that. And thankfully, software team are very good at kind of doing those things. But if there's something urgent and where other people are busy as well, and I have to jump in, like, yeah, I'll have to get my hands dirty. It's not a problem.
Now, as in your background, obviously, which we also need to talk about, is computer science and mathematics. And how much is of the work you're doing, and the entire company is doing, is just building software around existing AI technologies, or generally building kind of new AI technology? How mathematical is it? How much research, even how much science is it, or is it mostly just building wrappers around existing libraries?
It's both. So I'd say, like, loosely our two USPs: one, making a software platform that's easy for engineers to use and to do kind of AI kind of work without being data scientists. That's a big part of what we do, is making a platform that's easy to use. And that's, like you say, very software focused. Yes. And then the second part is the data science work. So I mentioned there's a couple big limitations where engineering is around low volumes of data and to do with 3D geometries. So on our data science team, they spend a lot of time doing research into the best AI methods to handle lower volumes of data, 3D geometries. We do research on things like, how do you make an AI learn not just like any model that works, but like a physically correct model. You don't want a model that predicts that like heat is or energy doesn't get conserved.
A few moments later.
And of course, during that one time of the day where I record a podcast that was in Amazon delivery, we will have cut that out. What were we talking about?
I forgot.
And we're gonna be cutting out some more stuff. So we were talking about AI and maths and how research heavy it is.
Yes, there we go.
What these smart people do. And you have a background in mathematics yourself, and you're a very bright Cambridge graduate. Are these what are the backgrounds of the people working on that? Are they even like maybe physicists or pure mathematicians or PhDs?
Yeah. So data science team in particular, who are doing a lot of the more mathematical based work. I think at least a couple PhDs. You get a mix of kind of everything: astrophysics, electrical engineering, neuroscience, generally maths, physics, engineering kind of backgrounds. Not that it's required particularly, it's just a common numerical area that a lot of data scientists come from. Interestingly, the team as a whole, you have a lot of maths backgrounds as well, even in the software team, even actually on the sales side. Or even a couple of the salespeople both have maths degrees as well.
Really? Why would they want to work in a sales position?
Sales is a very interesting role. It's not for everyone. But there's a lot there. It's like it's combining obviously the sales aspect of convincing a client, understanding the business value, but to be able to sell a product like Monolith, you have to understand the engineering.
Right,
you have to understand like how it can bring value, what's the type of data they're using. And if you have a salesperson who just kind of zones out as soon as they start talking technical, they're never going to be able to find the value. So we found...
Yeah, that's a fair point, because I remember being on some, for example, I was at Strata Data Conference in New York just before the pandemic, I think, in 2019. And when you go through these like fairs and different companies have kind of like big data technologies, it's weird if you have like a salesperson with no background in the field at all, trying to sell a product that does AI or data analysis.
Exactly. You're not going to be convinced. They're not going to be able to use the right terminology. You know, it feels like snake oil kind of thing if that's how they're speaking. So there's partly that, like to be able to sell a product, whatever it is, you have to genuinely understand it. So that's a big factor. The second factor is it's honestly more interesting to sell a product you understand. And so people aren't going to join if they don't understand how it's being used or what it's doing. So I think both.
Still must be hard to get those people, because I think I'm assuming the market for maths people is more competitive than for sales people in general.
I'm not sure that's true. I think both are tricky. It's tricky. Like I think combining the two, maths background salespeople, yes, that's hard. But you get plenty of people. You get people, engineers before, who moved into a sales field. It's more common than I expected, although it's still hard. But yeah, even other engineering tools are sold by salespeople. A lot of them, either they had maths backgrounds or they had enough interest and intelligence that they were able to kind of pick it up. And then 10 years into selling an engineering tool, now they understand the maths well enough.
Makes sense.
So yeah, you kind of get people from different backgrounds, but if they have the interest and willingness to learn a new field, they'll pick it up.
Now, speaking of backgrounds, I talk quite a bit about Cambridge on my channel. People are always very interested to hear how all of that works. And you have a very interesting study background, because you switched degrees kind of halfway through, which I think in this exact manner wouldn't be possible at most other universities or most other kind of Bologna bachelor programs. So remind me, you did 2 years of computer science, but then your third year of the bachelor, you did pure maths, just maths.
Yes.
How, why, and how?
Sure. So firstly, when I joined computer science, in your first year, you do 50% computer science, 25% maths, and then the other 25% you either do, I think it was like philosophy or physics or other natural science, or you do more maths. So in my first year, I did basically 50% maths, and so I did them with the maths department. So I already got a little bit, I kind of got half of the first year maths course already. But after that, you're meant to do computer science thereafter. So second year came, did the computer science course. Cambridge is a great place. There's a lot of extremely smart people. I found the computer science course was too theoretical for what I was looking for. A very interesting course. And
so you switched to maths.
Interesting, I know. So firstly, I was maybe slightly naive in that a lot of the stuff that I considered theory back then, I found that I'm able to apply it now, even though at the time it felt very abstract. Could I have learned it now just by Googling? Probably, but even so, it helped to learn in those classes. But maybe I underestimated that a little bit of like, it's really theoretical. I'd done a lot of programming already by that point. So I kind of underestimated it a little bit. But partly also the third year was going even more theoretical, and I didn't feel that was like, there were areas that really spoke to me. I was like, I really want to go deeper in this area. Again, it really depends. Some people want to be computer scientists who are very deep in some areas. Some want to be generalists. I personally am more of a generalist. And so that's why the third year didn't really kind of jump at me as super exciting.
But still, it was too theoretical.
So then I was like, okay, I'm obviously staying at Cambridge. I'm going to make the most of it. And Cambridge maths is obviously very known as like the place for maths. So I was like, while I'm here, let me make the most of the money I'm spending on this education. Cambridge maths has incredible, like world-renowned professors teaching their courses. Like, I want to get a piece of this. I want to make the most out of it. And particularly even in the first year, I think the most valuable thing I got was the supervisions I had with the maths lecturers was incredible. Like the amount I learned just sat in those 1 hour supervisions was like more than I learned in like a whole term elsewhere. So that's why I really want
this on my channel.
Yeah.
It's so intensive. And I mean, I met you as a math student, obviously.
Right.
Like, I came in as a visiting student doing just the part 2. And I can see that my camera is no longer running. Let me just check what happened.
A few moments later.
It will take too much effort now to fix it. So it's going to be an audio podcast for this one. So yeah, I was just saying, I remember these very intensive supervisions.
Yeah.
We had, for example, when I met you as a math student, I was a visiting student doing part 2, third year of the bachelor's program, and you had just switched into maths, and we were, for example, doing this. I think it was logic and set theory.
Yes, yeah, I know that.
Was so intense.
Thinking there was one particular supervision I'll always remember, which is I'm trying to remember the professor's name.
Imre Leader.
Yes, Imre Leader. Yes, who's a super famous person. And so he's doing this one of the question, and he's trying to explain something. So he goes through this proof, and every step he's asking us, like, does this make sense? Do you agree? And we're there both nodding away. Right. And he gets to the end, and he goes like, yeah, this was wrong. Where did I lie? Like, what was the mistake? And I remember both of us just looking at each other, going like, oh, like we were both clueless. Like, and then so that was like. Anywhere else, like you normally just get told the answer, or you just go through, like they really made you think. And like if you try and just nod along and go with this, like you'll get found out.
Imre does that a lot. He does. Even in his lectures, he's like, does it make sense for everyone? Okay, cool. But it's wrong. Where can we find the problem?
He likes that. Yes. So there was things like that where these like I said, incredibly smart, like mathematicians who are also incredibly good teachers as well, which is a tough balance. Yeah, honestly, that third year, like I say, I wasn't doing it because I was ever going to use anything I learned from there. I was doing it because it was the most amazing like learning experience I've had.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very amazing program. Like part 2 Cambridge Maths might be the year out of all the degrees and all the programs that really stands out in terms of how dense it is, and how much choice you have at the same time. Because I remember I was doing some, I think you were also doing it, right? Some computer science lectures.
Yeah, they had a couple on like automation, finite state machines, that kind of thing.
Yes. Cool. So and then you graduated and you didn't choose to do a master's, whereas I stayed on for the master's. Were you just, I mean, you were already a bit frustrated with the theoretical part of this the degree. Was that just it? You really wanted to get your hands dirty and start using your skill set?
So I mean, I had chosen to go even more theoretical. So I think that, so actually in my second year, I was meant to do a Palantir internship. And then just before the end, I started working on a startup. So I asked to, basically, I was like, I'm not going to do the internship after all because I want to work on this startup in an accelerator program. And they were like, yeah, that's fine, no problem. So I did this. And then, but I was like, I still can apply for a full-time role after third year. And they're like, cool, went through the interview process. So they accelerated it because I'd already gone through one for the internship. So then I had my offer by like October, so the start of third year. So then I also didn't know how well I'd do in maths. Like I was jumping into it. I knew, like, I think my computer science lecturers told me I was going to fail, not because they didn't know how good my maths was, but they were just like, you shouldn't be moving to maths. Like it's not possible. So they told me I'll get a third at best, probably fail. So yeah, I was like, I know you have to get a first to get to part 3. So I didn't expect that was possible anyway. So I partly had that, and then I got to the end of the year, I've got my first. They're like, you can do the masters if you want. I've also got this juicy salary kind of waiting for me from Palantir. So honestly, partly I was like, can I ask them to delay again? Like I already like rejected an internship after accepting it. Like, can I test my luck twice and ask to start a year later? I wasn't 100% sure.
By the way, it's hugely impressive that you did get that first in the third year, like coming from a computer science background. Is it because you did more maths than the other computer science students, or?
I think I was just more. I mean, I was always very maths oriented since school. And honestly, even like I was the first year, I'd done half maths as well, so I got a lot of the grounding. On the second year, like I went to a few of the maths lectures just because you can walk in and go to them. So I went to a few of them and learned a little bit there. To do the third year maths, I had to do like a test in the summer. So I revised a lot for that. And also in the third year, I kind of picked courses that needed minimal dependencies. So if I tried to do anything physics related, it relied so much on the second year content that I would never have been able to catch up. I chose a lot of courses like graph theory, logic and set theory, that don't rely so much on the previous year's work. And I also just naturally found it a little bit more intuitive as well. So there was some like course selection that definitely helped me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's definitely a very, very cool story going from like computer science to maths, and then joining Palantir straight away, and now to your tech startup. Really, really interesting, especially since the camera has left us. I think I don't want to stretch this too long, although I would also love to maybe I will have you back to talk a bit about the whole undergraduate in computer science at Cambridge and the admissions process and all of that, because I never went through the normal round of interviews because I sneaked in as a visiting student. So it was a bit of a different experience. And then only for the masters I applied normally, but it's a very, very different story than for the bachelors. Now, I think we're going to leave it here soon. We're going to play some chess. And I'm going to get absolutely destroyed because and we just have to briefly talk about that, because you're a very, very talented chess player. You're no longer pursuing it, but you used to be like #1 in the country.
Yeah, #1, #2.
#1, #2?
Yeah.
Not too shabby.
So not too shabby. Like I said, I started playing when I was maybe 7 years old. And then from there, honestly, just loved the game. And for years, it was kind of almost every weekend is you go to some tournament somewhere in the UK, play, come back, and then after a while playing international tournaments as well. Yeah, that was definitely my life for a few years. Lots of playing chess. It's a lot easier to learn at a younger age as well. Your mind's a little bit ready to learn new things, but definitely a really interesting game.
And since you have transitioned though to other board games, I think last time you told me that you're really into backgammon now, which I never really took seriously as kind of like a competitive board game, but apparently it is very competitive, and I probably be absolutely hopeless against another backgammon player who's more experienced.
It is. It's a different type of game to chess. Firstly, it sadly doesn't have the presence that chess has, which I think is a shame because it's such a complex game. Secondly, it has a luck factor that chess doesn't, which can be a good and bad thing. The bad side is it can be frustrating to lose to someone that you consider worse than yourself. The good side is it means anyone can win, and you're more open to joining tournaments because you have a chance of doing well, wherever your skill level. I also thought when I first saw the game that it's not that interesting. It's a pretty basic game. Interestingly, the teacher who ran our chess team at school, John Barnes, he was also he's #1 in the country at backgammon.
Wow.
So he told me at school, like he runs a chess teams and know him very well, and he told me like you should learn backgammon, and I played it once. It's a stupid game and not interesting. After I left school a few years later, I just gave it a go again, and at some point I realized like, no, this is a really deep game. Even though it's like the rules are so simple, there's just so much in it. There's so much pattern recognition. There's combinations of maths involved, but also just genuine intuition. Yeah, really deep game. And yeah, it's honestly, you can learn it for years and years, and it still just keeps getting more complex.
Interesting. That's so fascinating. I never considered it like that. But a lot of these board games in the end can be extremely technical, extremely mathematically challenging. And there's definitely a correlation between these kind of computer science and math folks and board game, like high-performing board game players. I actually remember that Imre Lieder, the professor we talked about.
Yes.
You remember that he is actually a champion. He was like UK champion in some board game.
Othello, I believe it is.
Yes.
Or Reversi.
Reversi, I think,
they
is
call it.
what it's usually called in Germany. But
yeah. So, yeah, he was, I think, is it some UK champion or international champion at that as well. It's definitely, it's common that a lot of board games players are mathematical by nature, but it's definitely not a strict requirement. You're not actually doing mathematical calculations most of the time, but the reason they link is mostly because it requires some sense of logic involved, some sense of like computing possibilities, which has a lot of parallels to doing like maths problem solving. So that's why you get the link. But there is a creative nature to it that shouldn't be kind of dismissed. Even if you look at kind of DeepMind and the stuff they're doing with Go and some of the things that they're playing, like that AI is playing, it you generally call creative. Like you can't put any amount of computation into what they're doing. Like it's genuinely just such creative play. So there is a lot of creativity involved in these games there.
And there are even some cross competitions where you mentioned this thing where you go and you play various board games, but it's all the same competition.
Correct. So I play in a competition called the Mind Sports Olympiad, where you essentially have 100 different board games of different styles. You get more traditional games like chess and backgammon. You get games like poker, group game, Euro games like Settlers of Catan, Ticket to Ride, which are more popular. And then there's just a bunch of games you'll never have heard of. And so there's two challenges involved. One, like you say, is to not just be good at one game, but to be good at multiple games. And that's a skill in itself. There's a lot of chess players that obviously like they dedicate their life to being grandmasters in chess, and that's all they play. Doesn't mean they can't be good at other games, but to be that good, they have to focus on chess. Versus the Mind Sports Olympiad, and to be kind of the Pentamind champion is about being good at multiple games. And that's a skill in itself, to be able to concentrate on so many games at once. And then the other skill is really a lot of these games you haven't heard of, people haven't studied to the levels they've studied chess. So you need to pick up this new game and based just on the rules, start to derive things. Chess engines have changed how chess is studied. These games don't have engines, and until engines exist for them, you have to put in the work of playing it lots of times, trying to understand, trying to come up with your own theories of how to play. It's really exciting. Like chess can be a hard game to get into because people have studied this for years and years, and there's just such a barrier towards getting to the top level. Versus these games, no one's really studied all that much, so you have a genuine chance to like study it and become very good very quickly, and that's exciting.
Yeah, no, it sounds interesting. And unfortunately, I don't, for example, have a backgammon set here, or probably most of those games, but I do have a chessboard, and I think we're going to wrap it up here. I apologize for the technical difficulties and the other disturbances we had, but it was a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Sarah, for making it, and I look forward to now off camera, well, off microphone, because camera's already off microphone, having my private chess lesson. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Und das war's für heute. Ich hoffe, es hat dir gefallen. Gib dem Video natürlich einen Daumen hoch und lass gerne einen Kommentar da, wenn du irgendwelche Fragen oder Anmerkungen hast. Abonnier den Kanal. Wir haben spätestens in einer Woche wieder eine neue Podcast-Folge. Ansonsten bestimmt auch das eine oder andere Video zwischendurch. Macht's gut und bis bald.